Was the killing of unarmed Salim Shamali in Gaza a war crime? The first shocking allegations about what the Israeli unit on the ground were ordered to do. Good evening from Jerusalem. It was one of the most published and contested pieces of footage from the Israeli incursion into Gaza. Palestinians claim it showed an unarmed resident being shot dead by an Israeli military sniper during what was supposed to be a ceasefire. That's been challenged. Some Israeli supporters have even suggested the whole video was fabricated. But tonight, a prominent Israeli activist, Iran Efrati, reveals to this programme that members of the Israeli Defense Force have told him officers gave them permission to shoot unarmed civilians, including Salim Shamali. He claims such shootings were part of a culture of revenge for the killing of Israeli soldiers by Hamas. Tonight, was this a war crime? From Gaza, she's 3 years old, needs urgent heart surgery for a genetic defect and was trapped after her home was destroyed. But today, Hala was escorted out by a British doctor. Also tonight, is Obama being dragged into new military action in Iraq? The Islamic State militants have made dramatic gains. Hundreds of thousands of Christians have fled their homes in terror as major towns fell. And trapped on a remote mountainside in the north tonight, tens of thousands of people belonging to a rare and ancient sect called the Yazidis.
Here, the Foreign Secretary is refusing to back a ban on arms sales to Israel, despite pressure from the Liberal Democrats and his own Conservative ministers. Also on tonight's programme, the government website advertising bogus jobs. We reveal the unpublished concerns of Parliament's spending watchdog. Are parents much less digitally savvy than their children? We stage a digital Olympics to test the technical skills of a 6, 14 and 40-something-year-old. And he's used to sinking his teeth into his co-stars in the vampire series Twilight, but British actor Robert Pattinson tells us they're not the only ones he wants to get even with.
And I think also just being like a guy, like it's so emasculating, like the fact that like there's a bunch of guys who can look at you and say and do whatever they want to and you can't do anything. And like all you want to do is punch them in the face. and that's what they want.
So, as we await news from Cairo of a possible extension to the 3-day ceasefire, there are new allegations tonight about the conduct of Israeli soldiers in Gaza, this time from one of their former colleagues. Iran Efrati, once a sergeant in the IDF, has told Channel 4 News that he has spoken to some of those involved in the shooting of an unarmed Palestinian in the town of Shajia. Their testimony raises new questions over the incident and the behaviour of the troops involved, as Inigo Gilmore reports. And be warned, his report does contain some distressing images.
Building after building reduced to ruins, Shajia is one of the most devastated neighbourhoods of Gaza. In just one night of shelling, 72 people died here. 17 of the dead were children. Hours earlier, 13 Israeli soldiers had been killed in particularly heavy clashes with Hamas fighters. Residents fled in their thousands. Today, some finally returned to their homes to see what they can salvage. As a ceasefire holds, people are trying to piece together what happened during the past 4 traumatic weeks. Israel's incursion into Gaza and the levels of civilian deaths have raised many allegations of war crimes, not least in Shajia. One of the most notorious videos of the entire war was captured here. It allegedly showed a young man, later identified as Salim Shamali, returning to his home, now in ruins. While searching through the rubble, Shamali was allegedly shot by an Israeli sniper. Today I met a former Israeli soldier who says he can shed light on what happened. He's an activist who seeks to expose transgressions by the Israeli military. He says he's taken testimony from 3 soldiers who were in Shajia at the time the notorious video of the alleged sniper killing was filmed, and says the soldiers witnessed what happened. We cannot independently verify what he told us.
What the Israeli army is doing then in a few different units, they're catching houses as bases inside the neighborhood and basically deciding on a red line, red invisible line that nobody can pass. Because if you pass it, you will be theoretically a threat to the soldiers and you can be killed for crossing this line. I can confirm a story about a man. There's a video running out I saw on YouTube. There's a video of a man looking for his family. He's crying out to their family members. He's crossing this red line. Two soldiers in the room with a sniper asking for an okay to shoot him. And he shoot him in the middle of his body. He's falling to the ground, and two other shots to finish him off.
So you're saying that two of the soldiers you spoke to were in a room that a sniper was firing from?
That's right.
Okay, and what did those two soldiers tell you about what the sniper did?
Inside the house, there were one sniper in the window. There's two different people in different windows in the house and another soldier guarding the door. The rest of the soldiers are resting. There can be, some of them are sleeping, some of them are eating. They're just waiting for new orders. And in that moment, they know people are coming back. They're hearing the voices. Everybody is standing up. Everybody is looking through their window. They're getting ready with their gun. The sniper getting to his position. The sniper of the unit is getting into his position, and he's just waiting for an order. And he's asking the officer again and again for at least 3 times, when can I shoot him? He's talking about the same guy in the green shirt that we saw in the video.
He asked 3 times, when can I shoot him?
Right.
That's what you were told.
And the officers tell him, wait, we need him to cross the red line that we decided. It was just a line on the floor that they decided about, an imaginary line. And in the 3rd time, the officer is telling them, you can shoot.
So then what happened?
They're shooting him 1 shot. The sniper is shooting him one shot in his body. The man falls down and asking for another confirmation to shoot again. And the officer is giving him another confirmation to finish the guy off. He's shooting 2 more bullets into his body and killing him.
And you heard this testimony from 2 soldiers?
3 soldiers. I heard it from 2 soldiers at the same house that were standing in the same house with the sniper and saw everything happening. And then from another soldier, there were 2 houses next to them and also was witness all the effect that happened.
So 3 soldiers separately and independently told you this is what happened to the man in the green shirt?
That's right.
Did they say to you that they believed they were following orders or that they had actually committed a war crime?
They were completely convinced that what they did was wrong. They will not use something like a war crime. They do not use those words, but they felt very guilty. They understood that they're shooting on civilians. They understood that that man, specifically the man in the green shirt, was not any threat to their life. And they understood that the officer let them shoot this guy as an outlet to their frustration, as a revenge attack in the middle of Gaza.
Well, I'm joined now from Tel Aviv by the Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman, Mark Regev. Who is investigating the shooting dead by Israeli forces of Salim Shamali?
I'd urge that if anyone has information that is relevant, that they come forward and speak to our Judge Advocate General, the highest military man who deals with these sort of investigations. Obviously, if there are allegations of misbehavior by Israelis, we can't rely on hearsay from political activists. I urge people to come forward. The Israeli army, like other Western armies, like NATO armies, holds itself to a very high professional standard.
So you're saying nobody is currently investigating one of the most notorious shootings of the military incursion that was widely circulated around the world. Now someone has come forward now and has spoken, he says, to some of the Israeli soldiers involved, and they make very clear allegations that you just heard about the conditions under which they could open fire. Now, you've heard those allegations. Are you concerned? Do you believe there should be an investigation?
Yes. Well, first of all, I don't think a YouTube put out by activists is necessarily objective reality, as you yourself know. But once again, the person speaking had no direct knowledge.
Not just an activist.
Relying on
he served his
testimony of
country.
others, and I would urge. You said he was an activist, didn't you? Or the reporter said so, at least that's what I heard. But if he has information, it's his duty, it's his obligation. We have a very independent judicial branch of the army, which is very strong and independent in Israel. And if people have information, they must come forward.
So it would be the army investigating the army, is that right?
Well, to be fair, that's exactly what happens in all NATO forces. That's what happened if there are complaints about UK soldiers or French soldiers. Do you think Israel should be held to a separate standard than anyone else?
Do you know who gave the order to shoot this man?
Well, first of all, once again, you're talking about a video that was put out by activists. We're not sure we have the whole story. Are you sure you have the whole story?
Absolutely not. But what we do know is that there is video suggesting that a man was shot dead. His relatives have spoken, saying he is dead. So, on first principles, we can assume a man has been shot dead. This was what a very notorious event in the war, and you're telling me no one's looking into it, and if anybody looks into it, it will be the army investigating the army.
Well, let's be fair. I don't think it's fair for you to hold, as a British journalist, to hold Israel to a standard that you don't hold your own country to. In all NATO forces, whether it's Britain, France, Germany, Italy, when there are investigations like this, they are done by the army with an independent branch that looks into these things. Now, what is different from Israel, from the United Kingdom, is that our military investigations are also open to independent civilian review. In other words, all these cases can ultimately go to the Israeli Supreme Court, which is internationally known for its independence and its professionalism. But once again, I think you have to be very careful when you base testimony solely on those of activists and of a YouTube put out by also a group of activists. You don't think that's not wise?
Obviously. Can you tell me then how many Israeli soldiers have been prosecuted in the past incursion?
I can tell you that in Israel we hold ourselves to a very high standard. We had a situation where a full general who was about to be appointed chief of staff, that's our highest man in uniform, couldn't take the position and had to resign after being appointed because in a real estate local council zoning and planning, apparently he filled out a form incorrectly. So we do hold ourselves, our generals, our colonels, our captains,
how many
all
soldiers
our men
have been prosecuted
in the framework of the law. Over the years, of course, there have been many.
How many? I mean,
I don't recall the number, but I can tell you in Israel we have a very fiercely independent judiciary.
Okay.
How many British soldiers have been prosecuted for things that happened in Iraq? Do you know?
When we spoke to you about the killing of the boys on the beach, you again said we didn't know what the facts were, you didn't know whether there was anything to investigate. You know a lot more of the facts now. Who's investigating that incident?
Oh, we know that it was a stake of mistaken fire, and our president, and now our past president, but he was president at the time, Shimon Peres, publicly apologized. When we do make a mistake, we admit it. But you have to make a differentiation between what is something that is criminal and something that is an accident in warfare. My Prime Minister spoke today about a well-known case in the Second World War where your RAF was targeting the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen and the bombs accidentally hit children next door. Now that's an accident of war, it's a tragedy, but it's not a war crime. It was just an accident of war. And you have to make a clear distinction here. The rules of war do so clearly in international law.
Mar Regev, thank you for joining us. Well, tonight we are still waiting to hear more about that ceasefire. For now, Hamas are still saying that without any agreement or any change in their status, the firing could start up again by 8 a.m. next morning. We will be back with more from here later in the programme, but for now, back to Kathy.
Thanks, Krish. We'll hear a bitter row is going on within the coalition over calls for an arms embargo against Israel. And this isn't just the standard spat between Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. Channel 4 News has learned that the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, has sat on a proposal for the suspension of arms export licences proposed by a fellow Tory minister for the last 2 weeks, to the increasing exasperation of many in government. I've been finding out just what's been going on. As the death and destruction in Gaza escalated, so too did the rhetoric deploring it. But the British government has been urged not only to talk tougher, but act too. Quitting as a Foreign Office Minister this week, Saeed Avasi called for a ban on arms sales to Israel.
It seems odd that we have a policy at the moment where on the one hand we allow arms to be supplied, and on the other hand we're spending taxpayers' money on patching up the people who may have been injured from the use of those arms.
She's by no means alone in putting pressure on the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, who moved over from the Ministry of Defence only last month. I understand the Middle East Minister, Tobias Ellwood, submitted a report to the Foreign Secretary a full 2 weeks ago, calling for a range of arms export licences to be suspended. But despite mounting casualties, no action was taken. Instead, Philip Hammond infuriated his Liberal Democrat cabinet colleagues and some of his own Conservative ministers by belatedly proposing only a limited embargo.
We clearly now have a truce, and I think it's very important that we should say loud and clear to the Israeli government, look, if that truce ends, if that ceasefire ends, if military conflict happens again, we will immediately suspend those licences. I hope we will be able to say that shortly. It's candidly, you know, if I was Prime Minister, I'd like to be Prime Minister. I'm not, but if I was, then we would have made those decisions earlier.
After one Foreign Office minister quit and Conservatives claim another threatened to, the department is in some turmoil. An announcement on an arms export ban was scheduled yesterday. The TV cameras were even readied, but it was pulled at the last minute as the Lib Dems and Tories continued to wrangle. Earlier this year, UK arms companies held licences to export nearly £8 billion of defence equipment to Israel. But much of that is for civilian use. Campaigners estimate licences for military equipment amount to £10 to £15 million a year. But on top of that, 47 open licences have been granted to British defence manufacturers, allowing unlimited export of military equipment to Israel, including artillery ammunition, targeting equipment and components for military aircraft. So why is the Foreign Secretary so reluctant to act?
Remember that Philip Hammond has only recently taken up office as Foreign Secretary, so it's inevitable that the direction of policy will be being laid down by Number 10 Downing Street. And Number 10 in turn may find itself under some pressure from the United States, because the power of the pro-Israeli lobby in American politics is very considerable.
There were protests in Gaza today, with the ceasefire due to expire tomorrow morning, a point being forcefully made by Lib Dems within government. But they've only just found their voice on the conflict. At a recent national security meeting, the only Lib Dem cabinet minister present made no contribution on the subject. Well, tonight the Foreign Office refused to comment on internal discussions. But I am joined now by Paul Everett, the Chief Executive of the British Defence Organisation, ADS. Paul Everett, let's start with what Saeed Abbasi said, the clip you just saw there, that it's nonsense for the British taxpayer, on the one hand, to be paying to patch up civilians wounded by the arms that we, Britain, have exported.
Well, I certainly understand the level of public concern, but I think we need to be quite cautious. As far as I'm aware, you know, there are military goods going to Israel, as your figures highlight, but I'm not convinced in any way that it's actually military equipment being used by the Israeli military.
Well, Saeed Abbasi's only just left the Foreign Office, and she seems to think that there's a contradiction here between what we spend in aid and the fact that we're exporting those weapons that destroy people's lives.
I can only say again, really, which is that it is not clear, and I would be very, very surprised to see UK military equipment being used by the Israeli military. The equipment, relatively small amounts of military equipment that is shipped to Israel, a significant proportion of that is actually incorporated by the Israeli defence industry into equipment that is sent to other parts of the world, and the export licence regime clearly shows that. So this is not kind of, you can check very clearly.
Even if it's relatively small, as you say, it's still estimated £10 to £15 million of military equipment exported to Israel a year.
And a significant...
And the Foreign Office believes that some of that is turned on civilians.
Again, I can't comment on what Baroness Wolsey does or doesn't know. All I can report is, you know, the reading of the information that is available makes it very clear that the majority of the equipment is actually for onward export, and the rest of the military equipment, as you highlight, is actually for civilian use.
Well, so except these 47 open licences that are granted to allow unlimited export of military equipment.
And again, the export licensing regime is quite a very strict one, and open licences are only provided in circumstances where, if you like, the equipment is not sensitive or regarded as sensitive, and the end users are not sensitive.
So you're saying that an arms embargo is completely unnecessary, basically?
An arms embargo is a subject for the government to make a decision on. I'm really trying to explain that there is obviously a great deal of public concern about events in Israel and in Gaza. I think from a defence industry perspective, it's important that people understand that we as an industry are not engaged in supporting or providing equipment that is being used in the way that it has been alleged.
Okay, so from a defence industry's perspective, an arms embargo would be ineffective?
Again, we are a circumspect and cautious industry. Our biggest customer is the UK government and our UK forces, and we would never be exporting any equipment without the explicit approval of the UK government, and that's what the licensing regime provides.
Okay, but as a representative of the defence industry, how do you feel when you see this carnage on our screens? How do you feel personally seeing those wounded civilians?
Clearly, anybody who sees that can be only upset. And I think that one of the reasons why I'm agreeing to do this is to draw a very clear distinction, which is that those sorts of activities clearly are inappropriate, but equally that the UK defence industry is not providing or supplying equipment that allows it to happen.
Paul Everett, thank you very much for joining me. Still to come tonight, job seekers could lose their benefits if they don't use it, but we reveal high-level concerns over bogus employment ads on the Universal Job Match website. And does a 6-year-old know more about digital technology than you do? We test it out.
Welcome back to Jerusalem. And while the eyes of the world have been on the conflict in Gaza, the religious warfare and wanton killing has continued apace in nearby Iraq. The UN estimated today that around 250,000 people are now fleeing for their lives in the face of the advancing forces of Islamic State militants. From their stronghold in Mosul, IS fighters struck out west at the weekend, taking the town of Sinjar and forcing 50,000 Yazidi residents to flee to the mountains. Now they've taken the Christian centre of Karakosh and surrounding towns, pushing closer to the Kurdish capital Erbil. Further south, 2 car bombs exploded in the oil town of Kirkuk, killing 11 people. This from our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson.
As the world looks the other way, Kurdish soldiers are desperately taking the fight to the Islamic State fundamentalists, but losing ground again. Because tonight it appears IS have taken another major prize in northern Iraq, the Mosul Dam. Men considered too extreme for Al-Qaeda now control the biggest dam in Iraq. And they have the fear that leaves this Yazidi woman exhausted on a mountainside in the heat without water or food. She's fled, like so many others. This woman spoke of IS fighters killing men, kidnapping the women and torturing people. Elderly Yazidi women struggle with children into the mountains. This ancient civilization originated in sun worship. Once millions, there are now just 100,000 or so Yazidi left after centuries of persecution. And even now they have reason to fear the coming of the IS gunmen. This woman said, "They're kidnapping our girls. They killed so many people. My son just died," she said. "He was 2 years old." Out on the mountain, another life ends and a woman buries her child. The Red Crescent says 70 children died out here just yesterday. The UN says people out here have nothing.
Well, we know for sure that there are 25,000 children in the mountains itself, and you're probably looking at about another 25,000 adults. So 50,000 people, we estimate, are stuck in the mountains at this time.
Some attempt to fight back, young Kurdish men lining up for Kalashnikovs to take on IS. Few have any fighting experience and they get just 2 magazines of bullets each. The Kurdish Peshmerga fighters have basically withdrawn from many areas. Undermanned, undergunned, they simply can't defend towns against the Islamic onslaught, and it appears they're now regrouping to defend the city of Erbil, the next likely target for the IS. Several mainly Christian towns have also emptied, the Peshmerga fighters telling them to get out while they can. Here the Bishop of Leeds spoke at the weekend of our having an obligation to these people. Once upon a time, a country called Britain set up Operation Safe Haven way back in 1991 to protect Kurdish peoples against Saddam Hussein's onslaught. A generation on, the UK and US have little stomach for anything like this.
There are no military solutions to the very difficult problems that exist in Iraq now. The American people cannot solve this problem for the Iraqi people. The only solution that exists is an Iraqi political solution.
And tonight, the men who out al-Qaeda are marching steadily on.
Well, I'm joined now from Washington by James Jeffrey, a former US ambassador to Iraq. Ambassador, this is your legacy, and there is an embarrassing vacuum in Iraq tonight as far as the United States is concerned.
That's true. The United States is weighing its options. President Obama spoke on June 19th and committed 800 troops to basically prepare for possible American action against the ISIL movement after Mosul fell. The president has not yet taken any action, and what we've seen is this movement expanding and expanding. We can talk all day and all night about political problems and issues, and they are significant, but this is a military problem, and you can solve it by military action.
So you want airstrikes?
Absolutely, but not just airstrikes. We've got to give equipment both to the Iraqi army, and we're doing that, but also to the Kurds, and give them advice, give them trainers, and have them do the fighting on the ground. This isn't a question of American ground troops, but the difference would be American air power. We saw that in Bosnia, we saw that in Kosovo, we've seen this all around the world. That will make the difference in stopping these people.
And it would be too little too late, is what most experts say.
I don't know who most of these experts are. Give me the name of one.
Well, Ambassador, if you think you could take a whole army into Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein, but you wouldn't have to have any ground forces to take on the forces of IS who are sweeping across that country now, that's an interesting analysis.
That's true, and but the point is there are hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Peshmerga troops. The problem is they are not well organized, they lack certain munitions, and most of all they lack airstrikes to deal with these people. These people are small in number. There's perhaps 10,000 fighters under ISIL, but they're very mobile. They've picked up a lot of equipment from the Iraqi army, and they just are unstoppable at this point.
Are you going to pay for all this?
This is, right now, the United States runs a $500 billion defense budget. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars.
So what else can be done? The declaration of safe havens, bringing in other people?
Well, again, the long-term solution is political. We need a better government in Baghdad that can win over both Sunnis and the Kurds who are fighting against ISIL, but they're not very happy with Baghdad. That's absolutely correct, and President Obama has been holding off to some degree because of that. But the situation on the ground doesn't listen to Washington or London or any place else. These guys are on the march. They're not on the march with a political philosophy. They're not on the march with a ballot box. They're on the march with tanks, with Humvees, and with machine guns. And you stop them with more heavy firepower in a military-to-military confrontation, or you don't stop them at all.
Ambassador Jeffrey, thank you very much. Kathy.
Now, it's revolutionary, at least it is according to the government, but all this year, Channel 4